My parents publicly threw me and my 7-year-old son into a dumpster and slammed the lid shut. My father sneered at the horrified crowd, telling them we belonged there. What they didn't know was that, as their accountant, I knew exactly where all their secrets were buried, and I was about to start digging. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of grilled chicken and freshly cut grass hung heavy in the air, a cruel parody of a perfect family afternoon. I sat on a wrought iron chair at the edge of the sprawling patio, a paper plate of untouched potato salad resting on my lap. A low-grade fever prickled at my skin, a persistent companion for the last week, making the summer heat feel oppressive and the cheerful chatter of my family feel like nails on a chalkboard. My son, Liam, was chasing a butterfly near the rose bushes, his laughter the only pure sound in a world that felt increasingly fake. My father, Arthur, stood at the center of the gathering, holding court as he always did. He was a man built of bluster and pride, his success in the high-end landscaping business having convinced him of his own infallibility. He gestured with his tongs, his voice booming over the polite murmurs of neighbors and family friends. My mother, Beatrice, glided through the crowd, a vision in a pastel linen dress, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. They were the perfect couple, the pillars of the community. From a distance, I was trying to calculate the precise moment I could grab Liam and slip away without causing a scene when my father's voice cut through my thoughts. "Elena," a word. It wasn't a request. I sighed, placing my plate on the table and making my way towards him. He led me away from the main group, towards the neatly concealed service area of the yard where the large commercial dumpsters for his business were kept. "We need to talk about the Wilmot property," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "Marcus has found an incredible investment opportunity for Isabella, a flagship boutique in the city we need to liquidate." My heart sank. The Wilmot property was a small commercial building left to the family in a trust by my grandmother. She had been a shrewd woman, and she had structured it ironclad. As the trustee, my signature was required for any sale. It generated a steady income, a safety net she had explicitly designed for her grandchildren's futures, plural. "Dad, we've been over this. Grandma wanted that property to provide long-term security for everyone, including Liam." His face hardened, the charming host disappearing in an instant. "Liam will be fine. Isabella needs this now. Her future is bright, Elena. We can't let a dusty old building hold her back." "It's not just a building, it's an asset. Selling it is short-sighted." My voice was quiet but firm. As a forensic accountant, I lived by numbers and logic, and the numbers said selling was a terrible idea. "It's not your decision," he snapped. "Actually," I said, my professional instincts kicking in, "as the trustee, it is quite literally my decision. And my answer is no." The rage that flashed in his eyes was terrifying. It was a look I hadn't seen since I was a child, a look that promised consequences. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with bruising force. "You are a selfish, ungrateful child," he hissed. He began dragging me towards the largest of the dumpsters, its green metal sides baking in the sun. Panic seized me. Liam, seeing his mother being manhandled, ran over, his small face crumpled in fear. "Leave my mommy alone," he cried, tugging at my father's trousers. Arthur didn't even look down. With a grunt of effort, he shoved me towards the open dumpster. I stumbled, my hands scraping against the rough metal edge as I fell into the cavernous, empty space. It smelled of stale refuse and hot plastic. Before I could even process what had happened, he reached down, grabbed a terrified Liam under the arms, and dropped him in beside me. Liam landed with a soft thud and immediately started crying. I scrambled to him, pulling him into my arms. Above us, my father's face was a mask of cold fury. He looked out at the stunned faces of his guests, who had started to drift over, drawn by the commotion. "You belong here," he shouted, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. He pointed a damning finger down at us. In the trash with the rest of the garbage. Then, with a deafening clang, he and my mother slammed the heavy metal lids shut, plunging us into suffocating darkness. The click of the latch echoed like a jail cell door. Liam's sobs turned to terrified screams in the pitch-black hotbox prison. I held him tight, my own tears silent, my mind reeling from the monstrous cruelty of the act. The betrayal was worse than any fever, colder than any darkness. The darkness was absolute, thick and suffocating. The air, already hot, grew instantly stifling, heavy with the metallic tang of the dumpster and the faint, sour smell of old yard waste. Liam's small body trembled against mine, his panicked sobs echoing in the enclosed space. I wrapped my arms tighter around him, whispering reassurances I didn't feel, my own breath catching in my throat. "It's okay, sweetie. Mommy's here. We're going to be okay." Outside, the world had gone eerily quiet. The cheerful party music, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, all of it had ceased. I could imagine the scene, our neighbors, my parents' friends, all standing in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. My father's booming declaration, "You belong here," would be ringing in their ears. He had not just thrown us away, he had curated an audience for our humiliation. Panic began to bubble in my chest, a wild, frantic bird beating against my ribs. I fought it down, forcing myself to think. I ran my hands along the grimy interior walls, searching for any kind of latch or handle, but there was nothing. We were trapped. The heat was becoming unbearable, sweat trickling down my back and pasting my thin summer dress to my skin. Liam's cries softened into ragged, exhausted gasps. It felt like an eternity, but it could only have been 5 or 10 minutes before we heard the scraping sound of the latch. The lid was thrown open, flooding the space with blinding sunlight. I shielded my eyes, blinking as my mother's form came into focus. Beatrice's face was a stony mask of disapproval, her lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. "Arthur has made his point," she said, her voice as crisp and cold as ice. "You can come out now. Try not to make any more of a scene." She offered no hand, no word of comfort. She simply stood there, waiting, as if we were unruly children who had been put in a timeout. I carefully lifted Liam, whose legs were shaky, and helped him over the edge before climbing out myself. My knees were scraped, my dress was stained with grime, and my entire body ached with a humiliation so profound it felt physical. We emerged back into a changed world. The party was over. The guests were gone, having fled the grotesque spectacle. Only my sister, Isabella, and her fiancé, Marcus, remained, standing by the patio doors. Isabella wouldn't meet my eye, her gaze fixed on a perfectly manicured flower bed. Marcus, however, watched us with an expression of faint, detached amusement, a small smirk playing on his lips. My father stood by the grill, his back to us, scraping it with unnecessary force. He hadn't won. He hadn't gotten my signature. He had simply revealed the monster he was. I took Liam's hand, his small fingers clutching mine desperately, and walked towards the house. "We're leaving," I said to no one in particular. "Good," Arthur grunted without turning around. "Don't come back until you're ready to be a reasonable member of this family." A reasonable member, a compliant tool, a signature on a dotted line, that's all I was to him. As I led Liam through the house and out the front door, my mother's voice followed us. "You're being so dramatic, Elena. You know how your father gets when he's stressed about Isabella's future." The excuse, the casual dismissal of his monstrous behavior, was almost worse than the act itself. I didn't respond. I buckled a silent, shell-shocked Liam into his car seat and got behind the wheel, my hands trembling. As I pulled out of the long, paved driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My father had finally turned around and was watching us go, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture of unyielding defiance. He looked so powerful, so untouchable. He was Arthur, the self-made man, the community leader who donated to local charities and sponsored the Little League team. Who would believe me? Who would believe that this man had just locked his own daughter and grandson in a dumpster? He thought he had broken me. He thought this public degradation would be the final blow, the thing that would force me to crawl back and sign away my son's inheritance just to be allowed back into the family's good graces. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who I was and what I did for a living. For the past 8 years, out of a misguided sense of familial duty, I had been the one managing the books for Arthur's prestigious landscaping empire. I did his taxes. I processed his payroll. I reconciled his accounts. I knew every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out. And I knew, with the certainty of a mathematician solving an equation, exactly where all the bodies were buried. He thought he had thrown me in the trash, but he had only given me the reason to finally take it out. The humiliation had burned away the last vestige. Ease of love and obligation, leaving behind only a cold, hard resolve. They had forgotten one crucial thing, and it was going to be their ruin. The foundation of my relationship with my parents was built on a simple, unspoken contract. I was the responsible one, and my younger sister, Isabella, was the special one. I was born of obligation, an unexpected child to a young couple struggling to establish themselves. I was quiet, studious, and self-sufficient, qualities my parents praised as easy. 8 years later, Isabella arrived. By then, Arthur's landscaping business was thriving, and my mother had settled into her role as a respected socialite. Isabella was the child of their success, a beautiful, charming doll they could dress up and show off. While I spent my summers working part-time jobs and saving for college, Isabella took ballet lessons, equestrian classes, and trips to Europe. My achievements, a scholarship to a top university, a degree in accounting with honors, were met with polite, distracted nods. Isabella's minor victories, winning a local art show, being named homecoming queen, were celebrated with lavish dinners and expensive gifts. I learned early on not to compete for their attention, but to earn my own way. It was a lonely path, but it was mine. After I graduated and had Liam, I moved back to our hometown to be closer to family, hoping that with adulthood and motherhood, the dynamic might change. It didn't. Instead, my utility simply shifted. "Elena, you're so good with numbers," my father would say, handing me a shoebox full of crumpled receipts. "Could you just tidy this up for me?" Tidying up became a permanent, unpaid position. I spent countless weekends and evenings poring over the chaotic finances of Arthur's company, creating order from his mess. I built professional accounting systems, streamlined his invoicing, and handled his tax filings. I did it because I believed, naively, that my competence and loyalty would one day earn me the respect, if not the affection, that they gave so freely to Isabella. I was propping up the family empire, the very foundation of their comfortable lives and my sister's extravagant whims, and they saw it as my simple duty. The price of admission into the family. Then came Marcus. Isabella met him at a charity gala my mother had dragged her to. He introduced himself as an investment guru, a vague but impressive-sounding title. He was handsome in a slick, polished way, with a dazzling white smile and a wardrobe of impeccably tailored suits. He spoke with authority about market trends and venture capital, name-dropping influential people and exotic locations. He smelled of money, old and new. Isabella was instantly smitten, and my parents were even more so. To me, Marcus set off every alarm bell my professional training had honed. I first met him at a Sunday dinner. He spent the entire evening asking pointed questions about the family's finances, thinly veiled as polite interest. "Arthur, that's a magnificent portfolio of commercial clients you have," he'd say. "The cash flow must be incredible." Or, "Beatrice, this house is divine. The property values in this neighborhood have simply exploded. A fantastic asset." He paid special attention to me once he learned I was an accountant. "Elena, how fascinating," he'd exclaimed, his eyes gleaming with an unnerving intensity. "It must be so rewarding to manage the finances for a legacy business like your father's. You must know its inner workings better than anyone." His flattery felt like a probe, an attempt to gauge what I knew and how I could be used. He was too smooth, his answers to my own questions too evasive. When I asked about his firm, he gave me a vague name with no online presence. When I asked about his previous ventures, he spoke in grand, sweeping generalities about disrupting markets and leveraging synergy. He was a walking collection of corporate buzzwords, a ghost in a Gucci suit. Marcus was the catalyst who turned my family's casual favoritism into overt, aggressive greed. He filled Isabella's head with dreams of a luxury boutique, a high-fashion empire with her name in glittering lights. It was a beautiful dream, but one that required a staggering amount of capital my father didn't actually have. Arthur's business was successful, but it was not the goldmine he pretended it was. Much of his wealth was tied up in property and equipment, his lifestyle financed by carefully managed debt, and, as I knew better than anyone, creative accounting. The Wilmot Property Trust was the only source of liquid cash large enough to fund Isabella and Marcus's fantasy, and I was the gatekeeper. Marcus quickly identified me as the obstacle. In his presence, my father's requests to sell turned into demands. My mother's gentle persuasions became sharp, guilt-laden lectures. They started framing my refusal not as a prudent financial decision, but as a personal attack on my sister. "How can you be so jealous of your own sister's happiness?" My mother had asked me on the phone just days before the barbecue. "It has nothing to do with jealousy," I had replied, exhausted. "It's about honoring Grandma's wishes and protecting the family's future, all of our futures." "Your future is fine, Alina," she had said dismissively. "You have a good job. Isabella has a chance to build something truly special. Marcus is a genius. Don't stand in her way." That was the moment I truly understood. In their eyes, I had already served my purpose. I was the sensible, stable one who would always land on her feet. My son and I didn't need a safety net because we had never been allowed on the high wire. Isabella, the precious, delicate one, was the only one who deserved to be caught. The dumpster wasn't a sudden, explosive act of rage. It was the logical conclusion of a lifetime of being told my worth was secondary. It was the physical manifestation of what they had been doing to me emotionally for 32 years, tossing me aside. The night after the dumpster incident, sleep was an impossibility. I sat in my small, quiet living room, the city lights twinkling outside my apartment window. Liam was asleep in his room, his breathing thankfully even, though he had woken up twice from nightmares, crying out for me. Each time, I had rushed to his side, my heart fracturing a little more at the fear in his eyes. The physical scrapes would heal, but the memory of being discarded by his own grandparents would leave a far deeper scar. The simmering anger I'd felt earlier had cooled into something else, a cold, hard clarity. The emotional ties to my parents had been violently severed. The daughter in me, the one who had spent a lifetime craving their approval, was gone. In her place was the forensic accountant, the woman who dealt not in feelings, but in facts, figures, and the stark, unforgiving truth of a balance sheet. My father thought he was a king in his small kingdom above the rules, but I knew better. The world runs on rules, tax codes, financial regulations, laws against fraud, and he had broken so many of them. For years, I had tidied up his books by straddling a dangerous line. I would correct his sloppy categorization and create legitimate-looking records from his chaotic notes, always pushing back when his requests veered from aggressive to outright illegal. "We can't claim personal vacations as business travel, Dad. This invoice from a non-existent subcontractor is a felony, Dad." I had been a buffer, a compliance officer he never paid and never appreciated. Now that buffer was gone. My clever trap wasn't something I had to build. It was something I had already spent 8 years documenting. My leverage was in the data. Arthur was proud of his technological illiteracy, entrusting all his digital records to me. He didn't know that for the past 3 years, alarmed by his increasingly brazen financial behavior, I had maintained a separate, encrypted hard drive. On it, I kept copies of everything: the original, fraudulent invoices he'd given me, scans of checks written to cash for undisclosed services, and detailed notes of every conversation where he instructed me to misclassify expenses or underreport income. I had started it as a defensive measure, a CYA file to protect myself in case his house of cards ever came tumbling down. Now, it was a weapon. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah who had handled my divorce. I met her at her downtown office, the encrypted hard drive in my bag feeling as heavy as a brick. "They did what?" Sarah asked, her pen hovering over her legal pad, her expression a mixture of professional outrage and disbelief. I recounted the story clinically, sticking to the facts, my voice steady. I described the dumpster, the public humiliation, and the long history of financial and emotional manipulation that led to it. Then, I placed the hard drive on her polished mahogany desk. "This is the leverage," I said. "Arthur's entire business is built on a foundation of tax evasion and fraud. He has a second set of books, hidden accounts, and a long history of paying labor under the table. I have proof of all of it." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with a strategist's fire. "Elena, this is more than leverage. This is a nuke." We spent the next 2 hours mapping out a plan. The first step was to formalize my investigation. Sarah recommended hiring a private investigator, a former IRS agent named David Chen, to corroborate my findings with external evidence. "We need to show this isn't just a case of a disgruntled daughter," she advised. "We need third-party validation, bank records, surveillance, witness statements from former employees." The next few weeks were a blur of quiet, intense activity. While my family was likely stewing, wondering when my desperation would drive me to call them and capitulate, I was building a fortress of evidence. I met with David Chen in discreet coffee shops, handing over lists of suspicious vendors and disgruntled former employees I knew had been paid off the books. David was methodical and efficient. Within a week, he had results. He found the shell corporation Marcus had set up, the one he was planning to funnel the proceeds of the Wilmot property sale into. It had no assets and a mailing address that led to a P.O. box. He tracked down 2 former foremen from my father's company who were more than willing to provide sworn affidavits about years of being paid in cash-stuffed envelopes, confirming massive payroll tax fraud. The most damning discovery, however, I made myself. While reviewing my father's personal bank statements, access I still had, I noticed a series of large, regular payments to a consulting firm I didn't recognize. A quick search revealed the firm was a front, and its owner had a history of fraud charges. But the real shock came when I cross-referenced the payment dates with Marcus's social media. Every payment corresponded to a lavish trip he and Isabella had taken. A ski trip to Aspen, a weekend in Monaco, a shopping spree in Paris. My father wasn't just planning to fund their future. He was already bankrolling Marcus's exorbitant lifestyle, bleeding his own company dry to keep up appearances and please his golden child. Marcus wasn't just a grifter. He was a parasite, and my father was his willing host. The case was no longer just about the trust. It was about exposing a rot that went to the very core of my family. The trap was set. The evidence was irrefutable. All that was left was to choose the time and place to spring it, and I knew exactly when that would be. My sister's engagement party was in 2 weeks. It was being billed as the social event of the season. It would be the perfect stage for the truth to finally take a bow. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week after I had set the wheels of my investigation in motion. I was helping Liam with his homework, the quiet rhythm of our evening a stark contrast to the storm I was meticulously planning. The caller ID flashed Isabella. I let it ring 3 times before answering, schooling my voice into a neutral, calm tone. "Hello, Isabella." "Elena," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that immediately put me on edge. "I was just calling to see how you were doing. We were all so worried after, well, you know." "I'm fine," I replied, my voice flat. "Good, good," she chirped. "Listen, the reason I'm calling is about the engagement party. Mom is finalizing the guest list, and she wanted to make sure you were still planning on coming. We really want you there. It's a family celebration, after all." The audacity was breathtaking. They expected me to show up, smile, and pretend that the worst, most humiliating moment of my life hadn't happened. They weren't sorry, they were just trying to manage the optics. An absent sister would raise questions. "I'll be there," I said. "Oh, wonderful," she gushed, relieved. "And, well, while I have you had any more time to think about the Wilmot property? Marcus has the paperwork all drawn up. It would be the most amazing engagement gift if you could sign it before the party. Just imagine, we could announce our new boutique venture to everyone there." This was my opening. It was time to reveal the first card from my hand, to let them know the game had changed. "Isabella, let's talk about Marcus's ventures," I said, my tone shifting from neutral to professional. "For instance, have you ever heard of a company called Apex Global Strategies?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. No, I don't think so. Why?" "Because Dad has been paying them a $20,000 consulting fee every month for the last 6 months," I stated, letting the fact hang in the air. I found it interesting, because Apex Global Strategies doesn't seem to exist, except as a shell corporation registered to a P.O. box. A P.O. box that Marcus rents. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to process what I had just said. What are you talking about?" she finally stammered. "That's ridiculous. Marcus wouldn't do that." "Wouldn't he?" I pressed gently. "Did you enjoy your ski trip to Aspen in February? How about that weekend in Monaco in April? The payment dates match your travel dates perfectly. Dad isn't just planning to fund your boutique, Isabella. He's been secretly bankrolling Marcus's lifestyle for months, using fake invoices to pull money out of the company." "You're lying," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me." Suddenly, a man's voice, sharp and angry, came on the line. It was Marcus. "What is this nonsense, Alina? What lies are you telling my fiancé?" He must have been listening the whole time. Perfect. "It's not nonsense, Marcus," I said, my voice now as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "It's called forensic accounting. Something you clearly know nothing about. You set up a shell corporation to receive fraudulent payments from my father's company. That's wire fraud. It carries a hefty prison sentence." "You have no proof," he blustered, but there was a new tremor of panic in his voice. His poorly executed threat was exactly the reaction I had expected. The mask was slipping. "Oh, I have proof," I said calmly. "I have the bank transfers from Arthur's business account. I have the incorporation documents for Apex Global Strategies with its P.O. box address. And I have a very clear paper trail showing that you are the sole beneficiary of that account. Would you like me to send you copies?" The line went silent again, but this time it was a heavy, panicked silence. He was caught. His immediate, aggressive denial followed by a terrified quiet was a confession in itself. "You stay away from us," he finally spat, the words clumsy and weak. "You're trying to ruin our happiness." "Your happiness seems to be built on my family's money," I retorted. "And I'm the one who manages the accounts. The party is in 10 days. I suggest you and my father have a very interesting conversation before then." I hung up the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. The first crack in their perfect facade had appeared. I had shattered Isabella's naive perception of her perfect fiancé and put Marcus on notice that I knew exactly who and what he was. His blustering threats and transparent lies only confirmed his guilt. He was an amateur con man who had underestimated the quiet, responsible sister. He had no idea how much more proof I had, or how publicly I was willing to use it. The engagement party was no longer just a celebration, it was a deadline, and the clock was ticking. The week leading up to the engagement party was a masterclass in psychological warfare. My family reacted to my revelation exactly as I had predicted, with a desperate, clumsy attempt to regain control. It started with my mother. She left a series of voicemails, her tone shifting from syrupy disappointment, "Alina, I don't understand why you're trying to hurt your sister like this," to icy anger, "Your father is beside himself. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." She sent long, rambling text messages accusing me of being bitter and vindictive, trying to poison Isabella against a wonderful young man like Marcus. Isabella, for her part, went completely silent. She didn't answer my calls or texts. I could picture her, caught between the damning evidence I had presented and the beautiful lie Marcus had sold her. Her loyalty was being tested, and for now, she was choosing to hide, likely letting Marcus and my parents manage the fallout. The most telling reaction came from Marcus. He tried to intimidate me. A letter arrived from a law firm I'd never heard of, a cease and desist filled with baseless accusations of slander and harassment. It was a bluff, and a poor one at that. A quick search by my lawyer, Sarah, revealed the firm was a single lawyer working out of a strip mall, with a history of sending threatening letters for petty scammers. We laughed and filed it away. Meanwhile, my own case was becoming an ironclad fortress. David Chen, the private investigator, was a miracle worker. He had unearthed the full, shocking extent of Marcus's history. He wasn't just a small-time grifter, he was a serial predator. David found 2 other women in different states whom Marcus had charmed and defrauded. One was a wealthy divorcee who had lost over $100,000 in one of his investment opportunities. The other was a young heiress, whose family had quietly paid him off to disappear rather than face a public scandal. David managed to get a sworn statement from the first victim, a woman named Clara. Her story was chillingly similar to what was happening with Isabella. The whirlwind romance, the vague but impressive business talk, the sudden, urgent need for capital for a once-in-a-lifetime deal. Reading her affidavit, I felt a pang of pity for my sister. Isabella was just another mark. The final piece of irrefutable proof landed on my desk 3 days before the party. It was a package from David containing surveillance photos. The pictures showed my father, Arthur, meeting with Marcus in a discreet corner of a hotel lobby bar. In the crisp, clear images, Arthur was handing Marcus a thick manila envelope. The exchange was furtive, their body language tense and conspiratorial. It was a cash payoff, almost certainly happening after I had revealed my knowledge of the Apex Global Strategies scam. They were trying to cover their tracks, moving to untraceable cash payments. They were getting deeper into the criminal conspiracy, not realizing every move they made was being documented. Armed with this mountain of evidence, I decided it was time for a second, more powerful confrontation. I couldn't let Isabella walk into that party completely blind. She deserved one last chance to see the truth before it was revealed to the world. I drove to the apartment Marcus and Isabella shared, a chic, overpriced condo my father was undoubtedly paying for. I buzzed, and after a long moment, Isabella opened the door. She looked pale and exhausted, the confident glow she usually wore completely extinguished. "What do you want, Alina?" she asked, her voice brittle. "I'm not here to fight," I said softly. "I'm here to give you this." I handed her a folder. Inside was a neatly organized summary of my findings. It included the bank statements for Apex Global Strategies, the incorporation documents linking it to Marcus, and on top, the sworn affidavit from Clara, his previous victim. Isabella took the folder, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't open it. "Marcus told me you were making things up. He said you hired someone to forge these documents." Her denial was heartbreakingly weak. She was clinging to the lie because the truth was too painful to accept. "Read Clara's story, Izzy," I said, using her childhood nickname. "Her name is real. Her loss is real. She is not a forgery. He did this to her, and now he is doing it to you. The only difference is that he's using Dad's money this time." I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The spell was breaking, but she wasn't free yet. "Dad wouldn't let that happen," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Dad is a part of it," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "He's so desperate to give you the life he thinks you deserve that he's willing to break the law and risk everything to do it. He's being manipulated just as much as you are." I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final blow. I pulled out one of the surveillance photos, a clear shot of our father handing Marcus the cash-filled envelope. "This was taken 2 days ago," I said. "Does that look like a legitimate business meeting to you?" She stared at the photograph, her face crumbling as the final wall of her denial was shattered by the undeniable proof. The man who had always been her hero, her provider, was now a co-conspirator in a cheap, sordid crime. I need to think," she stammered, backing away from the door. "I know this is hard," I said, "but you need to know the truth before the party, because everyone else is about to find out." I left her standing in her doorway, clutching the folder that contained the ruin of her perfect life. The choice was now hers. She could stand by the con man and go down with the sinking ship, or she could finally break free. The stage was set for the climax. The engagement party was held at the most exclusive country club in the county, a place of old money and manicured perfection. The ballroom was breathtaking, adorned with towering arrangements of white roses and peonies. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. My parents stood near the entrance, greeting their guests. My father, Arthur, was in his element, radiating success in a tailored tuxedo. My mother, Beatrice, was a picture of elegance in a silver gown, her smile firmly in place. To the 100 or so guests, they were the very definition of a power couple. I arrived with Sarah, my lawyer, who had agreed to come as my +1, a silent, professional pillar of support. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the glittering pastels and jewel tones favored by the other guests. It felt appropriate. I was there to attend a funeral, not a celebration. The funeral of my family's reputation. As I walked in, my father's eyes met mine. A flicker of something, anger, apprehension, crossed his face before being replaced by his usual charming host mask. "Elena, you made it," he said, his voice tight. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, my voice calm and even. I saw Isabella across the room, standing beside Marcus. She looked like a ghost. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She was clutching Marcus's arm, but it looked less like an act of affection and more like she was holding herself up. Marcus, on the other hand, was all swagger and confidence, laughing loudly with a group of my father's business associates. He caught my eye and gave me a smug, dismissive wink, as if to say, "You lost." He had no idea. The formal part of the evening began with a series of toasts. My father took the microphone first, his voice resonating through the ballroom. He spoke of his love for his perfect daughter, Isabella, and his admiration for the brilliant young man, Marcus, who was soon to be his son-in-law. He talked about their bright future, hinting at a major business announcement that would cement the family's legacy for generations to come. He was painting a masterpiece of lies and the odd. Eance was captivated. After a few more people had spoken, I made my way to the front. There was a lull, and I stepped up to the microphone. A surprised murmur went through the crowd. I was not on the program. "I'd like to say a few words as well," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the silent room. All eyes were on me. My father started to move towards me, a look of thunder on his face, but I began to speak before he could stop me. My father just spoke of legacy and bright futures, and I agree, tonight is about the future. It's about securing a future built on truth, not on deception. I paused, looking directly at my father, then at Marcus. For those of you who don't know, I am an accountant. For years, I have managed my father's company books, and in that time, I've seen how a legacy is really built. Sometimes, it's built on fraudulent invoices to fake consulting firms, like Apex Global Strategies, a company owned by my sister's fiancé, Marcus. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Marcus's face went white. My mother looked as if she might faint. "Sometimes," I continued, my voice unwavering, "a legacy is propped up by years of payroll tax fraud, paying hardworking men in cash to avoid responsibility. And sometimes, when you're desperate to fund a lavish lifestyle you can no longer afford, you try to liquidate a family trust against the trustee's wishes." I let my eyes sweep across the stunned faces of the guests, the pillars of the community. And when that trustee, your own daughter, refuses to let you squander her child's inheritance, what do? You throw her and your 7-year-old grandson into a dumpster in front of your friends and neighbors to humiliate them into compliance. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a single, sharp sob. It came from Isabella. This was her moment. All eyes shifted to her. Marcus grabbed her arm, hissing something in her ear, trying to pull her away. But something inside her finally broke free. She wrenched her arm from his grasp. She took a step forward, her voice trembling but clear. "He's a liar," she said, looking not at me, but at the crowd, at our parents. "Everything she is saying, it's true. He lied to me. He used me." She held up her left hand, and with a decisive, powerful movement, she pulled the massive diamond ring from her finger. She turned to Marcus, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. "We're done." She didn't throw the ring at him. In a final, triumphant act of self-respect, she simply dropped it into a nearby champagne flute, where it sank with a quiet plink. Then she turned and walked, head held high, straight towards me. She stopped in front of me, her eyes filled with tears of grief but also of relief. She reached out and took my hand. It was the first time she had touched me in months. In that moment, in front of everyone, she chose me. She chose the truth. The public humiliation my father had designed for me had come full circle, landing squarely on him and the fraud he had tried to welcome into our family. The showdown was over. The spell was broken. The fallout from the engagement party was swift and catastrophic. The moment Isabella dropped the ring into the champagne flute, the carefully constructed world my parents had built imploded. Guests began to leave in a hurry, whispering amongst themselves, their faces a mixture of shock and pity. My father stood frozen, his face ashen, while my mother finally broke, sinking into a chair with a quiet, defeated sob. Marcus, after a moment of stunned disbelief, turned and fled the ballroom without a word. In the days that followed, the story spread through our town like wildfire. Arthur, the respected community leader, became a pariah overnight. Clients began to cancel their contracts with his landscaping company. Friends stopped returning his calls. The public shaming was absolute, far more effective than any private confrontation could ever have been. But my plan had never been just about public opinion. The morning after the party, Sarah, my lawyer, officially delivered the dossier. One copy went to my father's legal counsel. A second, much more detailed copy was couriered to the local IRS field office, and a third to the district attorney. The choice I had presented my father was simple, delivered via his lawyer. He could fight me, in which case the full weight of the federal and state government would descend upon him, leading to certain bankruptcy and likely prison time. Or he could sign. He chose to sign. Within a week, I was sitting in a sterile conference room as my father, looking 10 years older, signed over his controlling interest in the Wilmot Property Trust to me, making me the sole administrator. He also signed a legally binding settlement, transferring a significant portion of his remaining personal assets into a new, separate trust for Liam's future education and care. It wasn't revenge, it was restitution. As the security my grandmother had always intended for us. Marcus's downfall was even more dramatic. Faced with irrefutable evidence of wire fraud and the damning testimony from his previous victim, Clara, he was arrested. His slick suits were replaced with an orange jumpsuit. Isabella, with my full support, cooperated with the prosecution, providing them with every detail of his financial manipulation. He eventually took a plea bargain and was sentenced to several years in federal prison. The landscaping company, already hemorrhaging clients and now under intense IRS scrutiny, crumbled. My father was forced to sell it off for parts, the legacy he was so proud of dismantled piece by piece to pay off back taxes and legal fees. He and my mother had to sell their large house and move into a small, modest condominium. Their social life evaporated. They had lost everything they valued: their money, their status, and their reputation. My relationship with Isabella began to heal, slowly and cautiously. The shared trauma and her ultimate decision to stand for the truth had forged a new, fragile bond between us. She moved out of the condo and into a small apartment of her own, got a simple job at a local art gallery, and started therapy. For the first time in her life, she was building something that was truly hers, without my parents' money or a man's influence. We started having quiet dinners, just the two of us and Liam, rebuilding a sisterhood that had been buried under years of jealousy and neglect. One sunny afternoon, about a year later, I took Liam to the park. He was laughing, chasing after a soccer ball, his face bright with the uncomplicated joy of childhood. The fear that had haunted his eyes after the incident was finally gone, replaced by confidence and security. Watching him, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had not just won a battle, I had secured his future and reclaimed my own dignity. I used my professional network to ensure justice was fully served, consulting with the DA's office to help them trace the complex financial trails my father and Marcus had created. My skills, once used to prop up a lie, were now a tool for justice. The dumpster had been meant to be my prison, a symbol of my worthlessness. Instead, it had become a crucible. It had burned away the last of my obligations to people who didn't love me, and from the ashes, I had emerged stronger, freer, and finally, in control of my own story. The lid had been shut on a painful past, and I was the one who had finally turned the lock.